So I'm talking about Trace Monotype today. There are two ways to do a Trace Monotype, and I'm going to show both. So you're welcome to experiment with both, find the best look. Mixing them together is a good idea as well. Either way, what we're doing is we're using an oil media to transfer information onto paper in somewhat of an indirect way. Some people call them pressure prints because the print is made by the pressure of your marking device. So again, we're simulating a press situation, but only an extremely selective area, right? So I have the setup here going. This one is going to be implementing oil-based inks, okay? So I have some collage material here that I gathered, photocopied, and I taped it down to my paper. And then I photocopied one of my old prints because I wanted to incorporate some other imagery in there. And I made a tape hinge on this piece of plexiglass. It doesn't have to be on plexiglass, but it helps, right? You could use an ink slab. Basically, whatever surface you choose to use under here, you need to be able to make it to where it's smooth and it holds a good deal of oil-based ink. So I'm going to go ahead and get my ink slab ready here. I'm going to flip this back, and I've rolled out some ink. I'm using the process red semi-archival oil-based, same stuff I was using for the stamps. And I tried to roll out a nice thin amount. It's really important that you don't lay too much on for this because you want just enough ink to transfer and not more than that. So what I'll do now is I'll take my brayer. Some people will make marks around here to get a good idea of where you need the ink. I could put the ink only in areas where imagery is, but it's going to look strange if I only have ink here and here, and there's a sort of plate tone transfer everywhere, but it won't happen in areas where I don't lay it. So I kind of prefer to load the whole area up with ink. And when I'm doing this, I'm trying to be mindful about spreading this in a very consistent manner. So I'm not really doing an up and back scenario. I'm doing a singular pull. And I'm going several directions because, as you can see, I'm getting lap marks all over the place. The idea is that I want to try to minimize the lap marks as much as possible by going over it several times. I'm going to go ahead and charge up a little bit more here. Again, nice thin amount of ink here. And since I started here last time, I'll start down here this time. I'll just kind of start moving it up. You don't have to use a singular color. You can build this however you want. The main thing is that it's oil-based ink, doesn't dry out while you're doing it, and that you don't have too much ink. Like that pretty well. All right. So because we're going to be laying our paper down on this, it's going to be in contact with all of this ink. We want it to print in selective areas instead of kind of going all over the place. So we got to be careful about a couple of things. One, we don't want so much ink that when I do lay this down, that a bunch of it transfers over because we're going to have a hard time seeing the imagery that we press in. Two, I got to make sure the pressure that I put on top of it with my hand is as clean and careful as possible just to reflect the lines. I need to keep my hand off the surface, and that's why I've got these little 2x4s here that I'm going to use to bridge my hand. Something I do sometimes to kind of keep the transfer of all the ink in like non-image areas down to a minimum, so I'll put a little bit of baby powder all over the surface, and that just kind of helps dry the ink up a little bit so that if it touches, it's more inclined to sort of have like a prophylactic with a baby powder so it doesn't soak in readily. But when I put pressure on the paper, it's going to soak in a little bit better. But when you do that, it's got to be just a very small amount. Just a light dusting, right? That might even be a little bit too much. I'm going to blow a little bit off. So now I'm going to go ahead and lay like these. So I like to use a ballpoint pen because it's not so sharp that it's going to cut through anything. And it's going to produce a pretty reliable line, right? It's important to have some kind of a marking device where you understand where you've already made a mark. That way you don't have to keep checking all the time, right? Sometimes colored pencils work really well for that, but then you have to stop and sharpen them. So I like the ballpoint pen just because it helps me work a little bit more continuously. So I'm just going to kind of use some different types of line. Everything I draw in here is going to transfer over to some degree or another. So I'm going to be kind of selective about what I choose. I'm going to do some contours. I'm going to do a little bit of shading in some areas. If you go over a line a couple of times, you're going to get more ink transferred there. You want to be really authoritative with your mark making because sketchy mark making will show up and it's just not going to look good, right? So try to make your contours very authoritative. So this is very similar to like when you're transferring, say, I don't know, a drawing from a master drawing onto good paper, like where you would coat the back with graphite or something. So the pressure of my mark making is what's doing the job here. A little bit of shading in here. So get this contour to move up and out just a little bit. And I taped this down to my paper so it wouldn't move. I'm just going to check it real quick to kind of see what I'm getting. I think I'm getting a pretty good transfer in there. That also kind of shows me where I need to spend a little bit more time. I feel like I should get some more of the shading in here. Now I'm not pushing so hard that I'm crushing the paper necessarily, but I'm pushing hard enough to get that transfer to happen. For this particular method, like with the oil-based inks, I like to use more of a textured paper because, again, that kind of keeps the incidence of just wandering ink from the plate down to a minimum. These dark areas, I kind of want to get more ink in, so it's going to do some kind of hatching, some cross hatching. I can see if I got what I like out of there. So it looks like in this case, I probably could have gotten away with like out the cornstarch because I'm not seeing any transfer in here. Like I got my ink nice and light. You know, eventually I'm gonna have to wipe this off anyway. Try different methods with this to keep that incidence of extraneous ink transfer. One method I tried was to add a little water to the paper, and that just made the paper compromised to where it wasn't strong enough as a dry print to hold up to the damage of the pressure. So I'm gonna get this very bad. This would be a good example, like where I'd probably want to use like a different colored pencil or something because the black marking of my pen is so close to what I'm seeing in the photocopy. A good trace monotype really is just the beginning. Like we're going to be working with some mixed media on these as well. We're going to do some hand coloring. We're going to do some extra marking and ink, and some watercolor, different things like that. We don't want it to just be a simple trace monotype. We want to add a little bit more interest to that. This method is something that you'll need to set aside some time for because you can't really start this and then go, okay, well, I got other things to do. I need to come back to it. So maybe I'll come back to it tomorrow because your ink will more than likely be dried by then. Like we want to work while the ink is active, it's wet and it's transferring well. So the day that you start this, you should work toward completion without any stopping. And while this is great for like, collage type appropriation kind of thing, I want you to have some original work to transfer in here too, like the way that I photographed one of my prints, or maybe you take a drawing and photocopy it, mess with that a little bit, maybe enlarge it, maybe repeat it, multiply it. Let's take a look at what we got. Getting there. I'm getting a nice clean transfer here that's exciting. I like Trace Monotype quite a bit because you can print things on your paper first and then Trace Monotype over that pretty effectively. It's a dry medium, so it doesn't require wetting your paper again. It'd be one of those things that you do to just add an extra technique to something. You'll be mixing techniques quite a bit, especially in your final project. But into the third week of this course, you'll be required to start showing some integration of different techniques and media that I've taught to create a unique look. Get over here so I can actually see the contours at the top of this head. Like if I decided I wanted to add more stuff to this, after I'm done, it wouldn't be too difficult for me to register more information on the back side of the paper. Maybe create a new color, do some extra inking in there. We might get more of that. Some extra shading. You do this on fabric too. The problem with fabric though is that it's not going to hold its constitution like paper does. It's going to move around a lot. So if you try to look at your stuff as you're doing it, you're going to have a hard time re-registering it to the paper, or to your plate rather. Maybe starching your fabrics or gluing your fabric to another piece of paper or something that can hold it rigid. I'm seeing the cornstarch actually kind of being a barrier up in here. Try to work through that a little bit more. I'm going to get a little bit more in the eye, some of those little veins and stuff. I'm going to have to rest my hand on. So hope that my ink dispersion is the right amount so that I don't mess up my fingers. So because this is oil-based, the lines on here, I can easily go in with any kind of water medium and do washes and stuff over it, hand color selected areas. You're going to get that oil resist thing happening with the water and oil media. Kind of a nice situation. I've got just about the right amount of information in there, maybe a few more like Hatching areas and display the iris. A lot more dark. I'm gonna try to pull more ink up in there. Pretty satisfied with that, I think. So the print then obviously is backwards, right? So like when we put our information here, consider this to be the back of your paper, this is the front of your paper. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna allow this to dry for a while and then come back to it and then do some other media work in here. So I'll include that in a future video. Some of the line work in here, I don't know if you can get in and zoom in and see that. This is a really telltale sign of a pressure print or a trace monotype, where you have heavy in the middle of the mark, and then it kind of fades a little bit off. It's kind of like a little bit foggier line. And that just has to do with the nature of like pressing your pen through a couple of layers and transferring the heaviest amount of ink in the center, but then just a little bit more next to it. Okay, so that's the oil-based ink method. The next method I'm going to go with is a lot friendlier in home studios, and it's something that I've taught for years at the like K through 12 level, and it involves oil pastel, right? So I've got these different images here, and the way that I need to strategize and kind of think about this is what colors I want with each one and how I want to compose that, right? So in this case, right, what we did was we taped our information down here. The print was backwards here, okay? With this, what you see is what you get. The orientation is going to be the exact same because we apply our media to the back of the paper. When we lay that on top, it transfers through with pressure that way. So I think what I want to start with here is this woman's portrait. I don't want information everywhere, so on the back I'm just going to add some color to like the eye, nose, mouth area. So I kind of generally know where that is, about in here. They've got to be oil-based markers, like that's really important. Like if you're trying to use chalk, like, you know, chalk pastels, it's just not going to transfer the same way. So I'm going to go with kind of like a light blue here. Now when you do this, when you place your color field on the back of your imagery, try to get it into every little nook and cranny of that paper tooth that you can. You can see that I have a few little skips in here, and so I'm just going back and making sure that I really like press that into the paper fibers because I want to have a really good complete transfer. Sometimes you'll end up with like extra business on there as it grinds off. Just clean that off before you're done. And I'm just going to kind of move down and I'm going to lighten up my touch a little bit because I want to fade this color into another. So I feel like with this technique, you have a little bit more control to make decisions on the fly. With this other technique, it just seems like it's more rigid, right? You've planned things out to be a certain way. Your ink is on the slab. You kind of can't really mess with it at that point. But with this, if I decided to use somewhat more of a collage sensibility, like I want to drop this here, I want to drop this over here. Well, what happens if I put it over here? I can make those decisions, like, again, on the fly. So I think I'm going to go in with some yellow and influence that blue. I guess I didn't mention this earlier, but I see this black coming in here. If you're concerned about the contamination of colors, just make sure that your oil pastels are clean. You know, think about maybe wiping them off onto some cotton or like a cotton t-shirt or maybe some paper towels if they have a bunch of other colors on them. I'm gonna fade this down just a little bit. Kind of want to get like a primary color fade going on. How close am I to the bottom? Getting pretty close. So I'm just going to go real heavy down here. I'll move my way up and kind of lighten up. to get this transition. Some people will like to get a better idea about where the information is from the front to the back. Some people will take the photocopy, and photocopy is the best thing to use on this because you've got virgin paper on the back, there's no printing, none of that stuff, so I would definitely photocopy your imagery. But if you want to know where that information is on the back, some people will like trace it onto the other side of the paper, either set it on a light box with the information side down and just trace your contours onto the back really lightly so you kind of know where to place the color, or put it up in a window on a sunny day kind of thing. But again, the thing is, trace lightly on there so you just have some guiding marks. You don't want anything on the back that could cause any problems with like transfer. I'm gonna expand my blue just a little bit. I'm gonna kind of lighten up on the edges so I get a lighter transfer. Okay, so I feel like I've got her worked out pretty well. Got this butterfly. I definitely wanted to get some nice cool colors and some warm colors going on with that. So yeah, looking at this, I just want to kind of keep it generally in this area, so I'm just going to start here. This process is a lot more forgiving when it comes to pressure on the back too. Like you can rest your hand on these without near as much fear of transferring in unintended places, because it takes a good deal of force to actually push this, to apply the pressure to this medium to get it to push into the paper. Because it's also, you know, it's not moist, right? It's, once it's applied, it's waxy, but like you actually need force to get it over there. Drop a little red in this transition. I want this butterfly to be really colorful. Okay, I've got that one ready. Oh, I found this really weird picture of bread that I thought was cool, but now I don't know. I'm gonna save that for something else. When I'm image hunting, I just kind of like go for it. I want to repeat this eyeball thing just so that we can get a good feel for the difference between the way it looks with this and the way it looks with this. But I think I want to get some black involved in that like iris area, and then I think I want to fade away with some blue. And I'm using somewhat of a textured paper. I'm using that like heavier BFK that I was using earlier on some other things. It'll do pretty well. So it's totally unnecessary to cover the entire back, right? So you just want to add this to the imagery area. Be selective, right? Oh, I didn't quite get as close to the edge as I needed to. Okay, so I've got my elements now. One thing I'm going to do before I get started is I just want to make sure that I don't have any of that like leftover oil pastel business going on. I think I'm going to start with the portrait first here. Look at this a little bit. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to get it taped down to something. Like I want to tape the paper just like on the corners just so it doesn't move around on me. Then I want to create some sort of a hinge with this. Don't just put one piece of tiny little tape on there, like actually hinge a side. Otherwise it's going to move around when you check to see if it's been an effective transfer. So I'm just going to like do that up here. It doesn't necessarily have to be attached to the paper either, but you'd want to attach it to whatever you tape your paper down to. Okay. Ink pen. Be selective in your transfer too, like find the stuff you want to transfer. Think about drawing over, adding stuff, right? Customize it, make it your own. If you're using appropriated materials, I'm going to expect that anyway. I'm going to kind of change my type of line to indicate more of an iris type scenario. Try some lighter marking, some darker marking. Like this bottom eyelid's not really well defined, so I'm going to do some work to get it more defined. So I'm not getting all this transfer out here because I didn't go all the way out to the edge, but I think that's okay for what I'm doing. Now I do need to be careful. You can see like just having a little bit of anything on my hand is going to transfer. So I am going to be careful as I do this. I don't want to, I'm going to rest my hand on here, but just gently, right? I'm not going to push hard. In fact, if I'm concerned about that, or if you kind of think that you're like a messy person or you're like me, you unintentionally destroy things, you use some bridges, that'll help. You don't just have to use a pen, right? Like you could try different marking devices. There's no reason you can't do like a little test on this to see like what would it look like if I took a card and scraped it on here? What would it look like if I took my fingernails and scraped it all over? You know, what would it look like if I what would it look like if I took, I don't know, like an eraser and did some things? Like that would probably give me a more interesting, softer line. And that way I can kind of like customize how I want to do it. Add a little bit of shading on the under part of the lip there to kind of create the illusion of depth. kind of weird, like I need to maybe add a bit more of a shadow down here. Okay. Do a little bit more freestyling on this other eye just to make it more interesting with some asymmetry perhaps. Pretty happy with that. Okay. So now on to, I think I'm going to drop butterfly down in here. The thing I like about this type of a process is that I can have a better understanding of what's going to happen instead of trying to visualize, like, what would it look like if I put this next to this, right? Like here, it's all, you know, it's all open for us to see. We can observe it. You'll hear me talk quite a bit about blind registration, and that's the scenario whereby your paper's covering everything. You can't really see where your substrates are, your information, your matrix. In this case, we can see everything, right? So we can work a little bit more impromptu that way. Okay, I can tell I'm gonna have to flip this just because of the arc of my hand. I'm just gonna start with like some contours in here. And like if I wanted a whole field of butterflies on here or something, I would just photocopy this like 5 or 6 times. And then each one of them I would apply the oil pastel to, and I can repeat that way. And I can, you know, I can create iterations with different colors, different experimentation elements. Like what's gonna happen if I do this kind of thing? What happens if I mix up the oil base ink one with the oil pastel situation, right? And of course, experimentation with mixed media we'll be getting into. See what that does. Okay. Finish that out. Oh, I didn't get any. So I would have to probably put more on the back of that to actually get that one. So I think I'm just going to do the one wing. I feel like I'm probably just going to do those contours. I tried doing this earlier, right? Like doing some shading in there, but I'm not really digging the colors. Like I would rather go in with some mixed media and maybe push this really dark with something else. So I think I'm just going to leave it open for now. Maybe I'll do a little repetition of those marks just so it doesn't look strange. Bring some out here or something. Fade it away. Looks like I missed some of that as well. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. Now I try not to tape to my paper if I can help it, because I don't want to rip paper up, right, in the process of doing this. So I try to leave enough paper on here that I can tape it to another, like a different substrate as such. Yeah, we're gonna get weird with this. I'm gonna do an eyeball butterfly. I want to try something like that. See what happens. In this case, I'm probably just going to tape it here and tape it over here. That should give me enough ability to open. This is a great way to take like sketchy stuff out of your sketchbook that you might want to finalize and make it look a little bit more complete. Photocopying that sketchy business, going in there and deciding what's the most important thing, how should I clean up my line work, things like that, by tracing it to another substrate. Your mark's looking a lot more complete. Say this in my drawing class all the time. Don't fight with your dominance in hand, right? If you're a right-hander, use the natural arc of your hand, the way that right-handers are more comfortable doing so. Same if you're a left-hander. Don't try to force yourself to do things that are gonna compromise the quality of your line work. See what I got. Oh, I'm liking that in black. That looks cool. I want to get a lot of black transferred in here. Kind of adds a heaviness to the composition where everything else is like light and airy and colorful. That's a lot darker. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to kind of fade it away just a touch. Far less concerned this time about like things, those details of the anatomy, like all those veins and things, because I just wanted to kind of get like a feeling of emerging. Brings us off the edge. I'm thinking about how I would shade a sphere, right, with pen and ink kind of thing. Pretty happy with that. I think it needs a little bit of integration here, and I think that's where the mixed media comes in. You know, I might go in here with some like India ink and draw some lines. I might go in here and hand color a little bit of this to get those to kind of like blend together better. I'm gonna try a couple of things here just to experiment a bit, create a little bit of atmosphere. So I'm just gonna lay this side up in here that I hadn't already transferred so I get the most amount. And I'm just gonna kind of like lightly scratch it with my fingernails. See what I get out of that. Very faint. It'd almost be like rubbing it on there. Let's see. What happens if I move it when I'm doing this? Just kind of get like some line work in there. Some really faint atmospheric business in there. I feel like I have to replicate that now. Drop some of this blue over here. Grab a card real fast and see what that does. Oh, there's an eraser. Okay, let's see here. Maybe that's not the right idea. Maybe I should just get color around that. Kind of creates a nice field of light color as well. If I wanted to really get a lot more color in the corner, I could use this bone folder and just burnish it like crazy. There we go. What happens if I do a little bit of erasing, maybe up in this corner here? I have a softer look. So I kind of feel like maybe if I'm going to do that, I should continue it down just a bit. So I'll just move it down a little bit with that blue, just to get it to look a little bit more continuous. Maybe pull a couple of little marks up in the face, give it some continuity. Some red like down in here. Some reds and yellows, maybe over in here. Okay, so let's look at that one compared with So there's definitely a difference, right? I mean, it seems like because we can apply so much oil-based pastels to the back of this and it carries a lot, we can push it and make a much more bold line. But in terms of these lines, I'm seeing it looks like we can get more detailed types of lines, thinner lines that can like sort of build up and create more value intonation. And of course, the other thing too that's like a major advantage here is that we can use a lot of colors all at once and we can kind of like compose on the fly as such. So that's essentially trace monotype or pressure printing.